Anti-protein science debunked. Hey guys, new paper just published looking at protein intake and mortality, cancer mortality, and cardiovascular disease mortality. 11 years ago, there was a paper published in Cell, which is a scientific journal, and that paper concluded that protein increased your risk of mortality, drastically increased your risk of cancer mortality. Some of the news headlines were, high-protein diets are as bad for you as smoking. And the researchers made some pretty provocative statements. The NHANES data set at the time contained mortality data on over 12,000 people. Without explanation, the authors of this paper eliminated almost half of that data set. So there was a number of problems with this data set. This new paper has Stu Phillips on it. For my money, is the world's leading researcher on protein. Now, what they did was they took the full data set of over 15,000 people now in the NHANES data set, and they did not create arbitrary definitions of high, moderate, and low protein. They created a data set of usual protein intakes. So they had tertiles. Basically, what was the average, and then what was 1/3 of the highest intake and 1/3 of the lowest intake. They created these kind of usual intakes and the distributions of those intakes so that they could have a relatively even data set so that it was an appropriate analysis using hazard ratios. So what were the results of this study? Well, the results were total animal and plant proteins had really no association with cancer mortality, cardiovascular disease mortality, and overall mortality. And actually, animal protein slightly reduced the risk of cancer mortality. And also, IGF-1 levels had really no association with any of the mortality measures that they looked at. Now, some of the limitations of this are they weren't looking at high protein diets. They were looking at usual distributions of usual protein intakes. They also looked at regressions in terms of like, is there a dose response? And they didn't see anything. The mortality data was pretty darn flat. Additionally, it's important to point out that this was not looking at the incidence of cancer or the incidence of cardiovascular disease. This was just specifically your risk of dying from those diseases. Additionally, it may surprise some people that plant protein did not appear to be more protective than animal protein. There are some studies out there showing that plant protein is more protective than animal protein, but I think one of the things to keep in mind is that is very much confounded by the fact that if you're eating more plant protein, you're eating more fiber by default, and as I've touched on many times, fiber has a very powerful, consistent effect on mortality, cancer mortality, and cardiovascular disease mortality. All right, guys, that's it for this week. I'll catch you next time.